Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling, well, a really significant and, frankly, difficult topic. It's the one-year anniversary of the horrific Las Vegas shooting. And we're going to dive into some quite unsettling new details that have emerged. From the final police report, yes, but also looking at some critical insights from a former CIA officer's analysis of that whole investigation. Our mission really is to pull out the key nuggets of knowledge, the insights from the material we've got, to give you a really full picture of what's been reported and, maybe more importantly, what questions are still hanging out there. Now, the official claim right from the final report is crystal clear. It says, no evidence exists to indicate Paddock conspired with or acted in collusion with anyone else.
Right, that's the official bottom line. But when you dig into the source material, as we have, you find, well, a number of interesting things that seem to have been sort of glossed over. So, yeah, our deep dive today is really about bringing those specific details into the light for you and asking, why weren't these lines of inquiry pursued more thoroughly?
Okay, let's unpack this then, because the very first detail we came across is, it's pretty compelling. Our source highlights a report from a young woman, works for DHS, a TSA employee. So, she has specialized training, observation, identifying suspicious behavior, that kind of thing.
Right, so not just a casual observer.
Exactly. And her perception, it was clearly sharpened by that training. Around 9:20 p.m., so maybe half an hour before the shooting actually started, she saw two women back of the concert area. They were standing up on a bale of hay, actually. Gave them a really good view over the crowd.
Vantage point.
A perfect vantage point. And what she reported hearing them say, it's chilling. The first woman, she said, quote, "Those stupid effing white people, they're going to know how it feels. They deserve this. Wait until later."
Wow, okay.
And then the second woman responded, just as disturbing, woohoo, like shooting fish in a barrel. Are you getting this, baby? I love you.
Shooting fish in a barrel?
Yeah. And get this, as she said that, the second woman was apparently live streaming the concert on her phone.
Okay, so you have a trained federal employee.
Yes. Hearing these incredibly specific, violent, targeted threats half an hour before the event.
And reporting it.
How does that not trigger immediate, intensive follow-up?
That's exactly the question our source raises. It's central. Now, maybe it's not conclusive proof in a legal sense on its own.
Sure, maybe not in isolation.
But it's decidedly suspicious, right?
Undeniably. And for it to apparently just drop, not be investigated thoroughly, especially given her job, her training, the specifics, that's a huge red flag in any kind of serious investigation. It really is.
It's a very powerful point. Okay, let's shift focus now to the shooter himself, Stephen Paddock, and his movements inside rooms 32135 and 32134. These are connecting rooms, remember?
Right.
The analysis we looked at indicates Paddock was, well, clearly in the final stages, preparing to shoot, building his barricade.
It is set up.
Exactly. And the hotel systems tracked his movements precisely. At 9:36 p.m., that's 21:36, Paddock throws the deadbolt on room 32135. Locks it from the inside.
Okay. Standard enough for privacy, perhaps. Right. But here's where the timeline gets, well, really interesting. Genuinely perplexing. 10 minutes later, and the concert has started by now, the deadbolt gets thrown on the other room, 32134.
Okay.
But, and this is crucial, the tracking shows the main door to 32135 was not opened again from the outside during that 10-minute window.
Wait, so if the door to 135 wasn't open from the hallway,
correct,
then how was the deadbolt on 134 thrown? It had to be from inside that room 134.
Exactly. So what does that sequence tell us?
It's the kind of detail that, keeps investigators awake at night, or should. Our source flags this as absolutely critical because you're right. If that first door, 135, wasn't open from the outside again, then that second deadbolt on 134 had to be engaged from inside 134, which immediately forces the question, did Paddock somehow zip through the internal connecting door and bolt 134 before maybe deadbolting the connecting door itself, or was there someone else already in room 32134?
There doesn't seem to be another way.
There is no other way. That sequence, that specific timing.
Yeah.
It has to be investigated. It demands a clear explanation.
And just to underline that point, think about what the police found later. After Paddock was dead, they breached the main door to 32135, found him. Then they tried to get into 134 through that connecting door. They couldn't. It was deadbolted. From the 134 side, they had to go back out and breach the main hallway door to 134 separately.
Okay, see, that detail right there, it strongly suggests, doesn't it? Either a second person or at the very, very least, an unexplained sequence of events. Something that just doesn't line up with the simple lone actor narrative. It's not a trivial detail. It's significant.
And what they found inside that second room, 32134, just adds to the questions. 2 computers were found in there, and one of them, its hard drive was missing. Removed.
Removed. Okay, now, again, could a lone actor remove a hard drive? Yes, technically.
Sure.
But the analysis asks the logical question. Why would you bring a laptop to the room for this horrific act if the hard drive was already removed?
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
It implies removal at the scene.
Exactly. The strong inference is that it was taken out at the time, maybe taken away, which points again towards someone else maybe being involved or having access, either during or right after. And maybe even more intriguing, a second pair of gloves found on the bed in 134.
Not the ones Paddock was wearing.
No, Paddock was found wearing gloves. These were separate. And our source describes them specifically as having, quote, had hands in them. They weren't just sitting there new.
Okay, wait. A second pair of used gloves. And these gloves. They were actually mentioned in the initial police reports, weren't they?
They were.
But then, mysteriously, they seem to have been dropped from the final police report.
That's what the analysis indicates.
See, when you stack these things up, the weird deadbolt timing, the police having to breach both doors separately, the missing hard drive, now a second pair of used gloves that disappears from the final narrative, it really starts to build a case. It's certainly compelling evidence suggesting a second person might have been there. These aren't just, random little coincidences. Okay, let's move on then to some specific individuals. People who seem to have connections but remain, well, largely unquestioned. The source brings up a guy named Brian Hodges. He's Australian, and he made multiple social media posts, even did interviews back in Australia, claiming he was in room 32134. Paddock's room.
He claimed he was in the shooter's room.
Yes. Now, he was also a registered guest on that floor, room 32129, so very close by.
Okay, so he's on the floor, near the rooms, and publicly claims he was in one of the rooms involved.
Right.
Why? Why on earth hasn't this person been thoroughly questioned by authorities?
That's the core question, isn't it?
It really is. The analysis highlights this strongly. He has apparently not been questioned by U.S. authorities to this day, despite claiming to be in the room, despite being registered feet away.
Yeah.
It's an investigative gap that's frankly astounding.
Then there's Marilou Danley, Paddock's girlfriend. And it's really important to remember this point. She was the only source, the sole source for the police concluding Paddock was non-political.
Not his family.
No, his estranged family members basically said they didn't know his leanings, they were out of touch, so it rests entirely on her account. And, it's noted in the analysis, Danley herself was widely thought to be, perhaps, the more radical leftist of the two.
Okay, so the non-political label hinges on her testimony alone.
Pretty much. But here's where it gets even stranger. An astounding link the source material connects. Both this Brian Hodges, the Australian guy claiming he was in the room,
Yeah.
and Marilou Danley, they both claim to have worked at the same place in Australia, the Star Gold Coast Casino. And, crucially, during the same period of time.
Wait, Hodges and Danley worked at the same casino at the same time in Australia?
That's the connection drawn in the analysis.
Okay, that's significant because the investigation points out that's the only casino in that specific area of Australia. It's described as, a relatively small community of dealers. People know each other. It would have been very, very difficult for them not to have at least known each other, maybe just by sight.
Right. So you have this connection back in Australia. And then fast forward, Brian Hodges just shows up on the same floor, yards away from where Marilou Danley is now dating Stephen Paddock at the time of the shooting.
And claims to have been in the room.
It just feels like too much of a coincidence to simply ignore, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And this connection, this potential link between Hodges and Danley, again, unbelievably, it seems it has never been investigated either. How can this guy, Brian Hodges, with all these potential links, proximity, claims of being in the room, prior connection to Danley, how can he still apparently not have been formally questioned? It leaves a massive, massive hole in the official story.
Okay, so finally, let's just circle back to that official conclusion. No motive, and specifically not political. Our source offers some, interesting counterpoints, or context at least. Paddock started buying the specific guns used in the shooting right around the time Donald Trump was elected.
Yep.
He built up that arsenal over about 8 months leading up to the shooting. Now, maybe it's just a coincidence, but the analysis calls it an interesting quirk of timing.
A quirk of timing that hasn't really been given any weight or significance in the official motive assessment.
Exactly. And then there's the target itself, the concert. It was a country western music festival. widely seen, rightly or wrongly, as being packed with Trump supporters.
That was definitely the perception.
Whether it was 100% accurate doesn't even matter as much as the perception. It's very reasonable to think Paddock himself might have perceived it that way too.
And tying back,
Yeah,
the only person saying he was non-political was Marilou Danley,
correct.
who, as we've mentioned, was herself believed by some to hold more radical leftist views, while his actual family, who might offer a different perspective, just said they didn't know. It really makes her testimony the linchpin for that whole no political motive conclusion.
So let's try and sum this up. After this deep dive, what have we really brought to the surface? We've looked at that unheeded witness account from the trained TSA employee, chilling words spoken just before. We've got the really perplexing deadbolt mystery, that sequence of locks in Paddock's rooms.
Suggesting someone else potentially?
Right. Then the missing hard drive from the computer in the second room. The second pair of used gloves found there, later dropped from the report.
More potential evidence of another person.
Then the Australian, Brian Hodges. His claims, his proximity, and that really crucial uninvestigated connection back to Marilou Danley through the casino work.
A connection that just begs for investigation.
And finally, these unexamined timing issues around the gun purchases and the election and the political perception of the target, set against the sole reliance on Danley's word for no motive. It paints a picture not of answers, but of a lot of unanswered questions.
Yeah, and you have to remember the scale of this tragedy. 58 people killed,
Yep.
over 800 wounded. The families of those victims, they are desperate for answers. They deserve answers. And, real closure. It just can't happen until all these loose ends, all these things we've talked about today, until they're properly investigated, run down completely. The current official report, based on what our source material suggests was missed or ignored, it's simply not giving those families or the public what's needed for true understanding.
So what does this deep dive mean for you listening right now? I think examining how things like that witness account or the physical evidence of the deadbolts, how they seem to almost vanish from official consideration, it really drives home a crucial point. Sometimes the truth isn't just about what is in an official report. Sometimes, maybe even more importantly, it's about what's left out and asking why. It should encourage all of us, really, to ask those tougher questions when the official story feels incomplete or doesn't quite add up.
And maybe leave you with this thought to chew on. When official reports state definitively no evidence of conspiracy, but source analyses like the ones we've looked at present multiple points described as decidedly suspicious, even certainly evidence that seems to have just not been investigated fully. What does that really imply about how truth is pursued or perhaps avoided in these huge, impactful events? What are the broader implications for trying to understand complex situations when certain paths of inquiry just seem to be, well, walled off or ignored? Something to think about.